Hello, it's a pleasure to join you here today for the Gartner IT Expo for Europe, Middle East, Africa. My name is Scott Now and I'm Head of Data Platforms for InterSystems. You may not have heard of InterSystems, but we are a leading provider of data technology for extremely critical data and applications in many industries, including healthcare, finance, and logistics. We help our customers solve their most pressing scalability, interoperability, and speed problems. The global pandemic is certainly trying organizations worldwide, and many are struggling to find a way to cope. So resiliency is definitely an important topic. What we see and what many analysts agree with is that without being able to access and manage your critical data, it's very hard to sustain a healthy business, let alone manage a crisis of this magnitude, because you're either flying blind without visibility or you can't act as fast as you need to. It's with this theme of resiliency in mind that it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Fiona Murray of MIT. She is the William Porter Professor of Entrepreneurship at MIT, as well as the Associate Dean for Innovation and Inclusion. She's the co-director of the MIT Innovation Initiative and a member of the UK Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology. She'll be speaking with you about innovation and adaptation, building a resilient organization. And InterSystems is extremely proud to sponsor her talk. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Professor Fiona Murray from MIT, where I'm the Associate Dean of Innovation and Inclusion. I'm delighted to join you today and talk a little bit about how we think about leading for innovation and adaptation. At MIT, we've been thinking about innovation since the founding of our university. And we have a working definition of innovation that helps us really think about how to be effective with our time, our energy, our resources, and really focus our students and our faculty's attention on the important job of innovating. Our definition is a process definition. We talk about the process of taking ideas from inception to impact. So let me just take a few moments to unpack that definition. So we start with the word ideas. We don't use the word technology, but we talk specifically about ideas, and we say that an idea is a match between a problem and a solution, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. We're interested in impact, which is broader than simply profit, although profits are obviously important, and economic impact is absolutely essential to today's innovation economy. But for every organization I work with, I ask them to think about what impact means for them. Is it economic impact? Is it social impact? Is it environmental impact? Is it an impact on well-being and quality of life? That's really for you to decide, but it's an important part of our definition of taking ideas to impact. Now, we have this process definition because we want to highlight the entire journey of innovation. We want to think about the fact that this journey goes from the earliest stages of invention and creativity and those aha moments all the way through to impact, which is when we have something in the hands of the people who need it. By focusing on the process as opposed to the specifics of products and services, it lets us think about what our strengths and weaknesses are, where the frictions are in the system, and when we need to change or where we need to improve. And by thinking about that journey, we recognize that we engage many different parties. I'm obviously spend a lot of time thinking about the role of the university in that innovation journey. But we also think about the role of startups, the role of large corporations, the work that nonprofits do, and the essential role of government in that whole innovation cycle. Now, I want to turn now to the specific idea of the match between a problem and a solution. So as you'll see here, we think about this as a sort of innovation landscape where we have distinctive horizons. On the x-axis, we're thinking about the solution space and the degree of novelty and the types of solutions that we want to focus on. As we move out to the right-hand side, we're thinking about solutions that are more and more novel, that have higher degrees of risk and uncertainty associated with them. As we move up the y-axis, we're thinking about the degree of novelty of a particular problem. And so we're thinking about whether or not the problem is new to us, whether it's a new problem for our customers, or perhaps we're working with a new group of people with whom we've never worked before. And so as we move up, we have problem uncertainty and problem risk. What that means is that as we move out to the top right-hand side, we're really exploring a very far-out innovation horizon that's going to have a lot of risk and uncertainty associated with it. When we're in the bottom left-hand corner, we're really doing business as usual. As we start to move out, we're focused on what I would call little I innovation. That's the 10% improvements, the incremental innovation. But often the challenges for our organization are being right out at that far distant innovation horizon. It's about the big I innovation. It's about the 10x change and transformation that we need right out on the horizon, and that is very challenging for most organizations to cope with. And so if we're an adaptive organization and we want to really be able to cope with new information, with shocks to the system that we've all been struggling with recently, we have to work across the innovation horizons and particularly work at that far distant horizon, which is often challenging because whilst it's distant with respect to what we can do today, it's actually often close in time. We have to get there quickly, even though that's fraught with risk and uncertainty. And so as an organization, we often have to think about what's our portfolio of activities. Our portfolio of projects in that innovation landscape needs to reflect our innovation strategy. Regardless of what our strategy says, it's our resource allocation to those innovation projects that's really the living embodiment of our innovation strategy. And we know that work at that distant horizon is fraught with uncertainty. It requires us to adapt to new and evolving information and is the place where we need to do organizational work. And we need to ask the question, how can you build an organization that's more effective right out on that horizon? And so we've learned many lessons from the current COVID-19 crisis about how to be adaptive at that horizon and how to be adaptive to these current and very rapidly changing times. We've learned a lot of our lessons from looking at what startups have been doing. Startups that have shifted their activities very dramatically towards focusing very, very specifically on the COVID crisis. We've learned a lot from organizations that have adapted, for example, the use of their massive infrastructure for DNA sequencing. And they've taken that from research to testing. Places like the Broad Institute have been able to do that adaptation very rapidly. We've looked as engineers have taken on the ventilator shortage or have used this huge distributed infrastructure of 3D printing to basically create new PPE. We've looked at organizations like Moderna who've shifted their RNAi vaccine capabilities specifically towards COVID. And the question is, what can we learn during these crisis moments about crisis innovation that we can take into being good as adaptive leaders for innovation more generally? And so there's a very core activity and behavior that we really see effective teams undertaking. They're using fast, iterative innovation loops to really be effective at moving towards the horizon. And they do those loops in a way that is small, fast, and cheap as possible. Now, there are many books that you can read about innovation and entrepreneurship, and they'll often talk about things like lean startup, agile, scrum, business model canvas, design thinking. Now, I've read all those books, so I hope you've read some of them, but I've read them, and basically, if you boil down the essence of what each of them is saying, is that they really do have this model at the core of us undertaking these innovation loops that are all about experimentation and evaluation. The experimentation, as you can see, is all about testing ideas rapidly and effectively so that we can maximize cost-effective information gathering and learning. But it's not enough to experiment. We actually then have to evaluate the results of the experiment, decide what we've learned, and then update our beliefs about the hypotheses that we had. And so in that way, we're engaging in learning loops where we're continuously updating in a sort of Bayesian updating kind of way to decide what to do next. Now, effective large organizations are those that can really structure their work into a series or a sequence of innovation loops. They can structure their work into a sequence of experiments with learning at each stage. But more than that, they need to structure their work into a portfolio of projects, each of which is undertaking these innovation loops, each of which is characterized by high levels of risk and uncertainty. And we need to be able to enable each project, but we have to also manage our portfolio, stopping some projects and then increasing the resources that we allocate to others. And so as we think about how to do that and how to take on those behaviors to build a culture, a community that's able to do that effectively, we know that that's a challenging task, particularly in large organizations who are basically optimized for business as usual and for that incremental little I innovation. For them to get good at the practices right out at the innovation horizon is more challenging. And so we really have found 3 implementation lessons, many of which draw some inspiration from Edison, who said, "I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." So the question is, how can we be more efficient than that, but still allow the space for the learning and the exploration that's so important? And those 3 lessons are the following. First, we need to establish a common strategic purpose for experimentation, a theory of the future, if you will, to guide direction. Second, we need to create an innovation system that actually enables and supports experimentation and learning. And third, we need to engage diverse stakeholders within and outside the organization so we can draw on a very rich set of ideas to really populate those experiments and take ideas forward. So let me unpack each of those in turn. So the first requirement of organizational adaptation is really that we can be most effective when there's a common strategic purpose. To have that common strategic purpose, we need to create a shared view, a hypothesis, if you will, of the future, or what I might call a theory of the future, which is going to be critical to provide the themes and challenges that are going to define the future actions of the innovators across our organization. This hypothesis is going to be highly uncertain. It's going to be imperfect. It's going to be wrong because it's about a future that's yet to unfold. But it helps our organizations create alignment and inclusion. There's many common failure modes. Perhaps the most significant is really having too many theories of the future or not really being able to articulate 1 or 2 that are going to guide the direction of your organization. I've seen great examples of organizations who are very good at this. An organization like ARM in its semiconductor design and manufacturing, really having a theory of the future that's focused on the Internet of Things. Closer to home, an organization like Hartford Healthcare, having a theory of the future that is all about a shift to the use of data and analytics in the hospital to improve healthcare and improve the patient experience. Much of their work about the theory of the future was undertaken before COVID, but really set them up for success. I follow them carefully because a number of the leaders there are MIT alum, and I've had the pleasure to work with them. But it's really a wonderful example of creating that strategic purpose. The second is that organizational adaptation requires a system that enables experimentation. As I've said, experimentation is reasonably straightforward in startups who are actually optimized organizationally in terms of their incentives and their financing structures for the task of very rapid learning loops, staged through milestones. But we need to structure effective learning in a large organization, and that's more difficult. It really requires a system that's going to support cycles of experimentation and evaluation. And that system has to allow us to stop things as well as to continue to learn and nurture and encourage experiments going forward. And it's actually the stopping that can be very organizationally challenging. I put this up here to look something like a kind of a funnel. And I just want to note that this is a little different from a classic stage gate funnel because at each stage we're really asking about the particular milestones for any given project. Now, there are some organizations of which Flagship Pioneering is one of the best examples who've really tried to systematize this process by really exploring seed stage hypotheses about a particular problem and solution very early on, building what they would call, and we would at MIT call proto-ventures, that are sort of small ventures trying to think about and take on these audacious hypotheses about the future. But at each stage being willing to start with a large number and start to cull down those ideas into a smaller collection. So if we build a system and we have a strategic focus to guide that system, the last thing that we need is really to think about the stakeholders. Where are we going to generate those ideas from? Who's going to populate the teams and the leadership? And we know that really effective organizational adaptation requires us to have innovation stakeholders inside and out who have tremendously diverse perspectives. When we're close to business as usual, to that incremental innovation, we can probably work with people who we know well, who are familiar with the ideas, and we're not having to explore innovation space very widely. As we move out on that frontier, we need to be able to explore those spaces widely and overcome our blind spots. So what does it mean for us to have to do that? It means we have to have very different kinds of people, whether that's in people's educational backgrounds, their lived experiences, their race or their gender. All of those things allow us to create a much richer set of insights into the innovation horizon. And we know that this makes good economic sense, and there's a lot of evidence for that, because companies with above average diversity actually produce a greater proportion of their revenues from innovation. Companies without diverse leaderships don't hear as much from women from people of colour or from those in the LGBTQ community. Their ideas are somehow not heard in the same way. And if we look at the venture community, we know that investors who have more diverse networks actually engage with and see a more diverse set of projects, and in fact are more likely to have top quartile outcomes. There are a number of organizations that I could point to doing really important and interesting work in that. They range from organizations like Morgan Stanley in banking to SAP in Europe and some of its work. There are many good examples, although this is a challenging problem for most of our organizations. And so the question I want to end with is really for you to think about your role as leaders. What do you need to do to enable adaptation and to shape your engagement with the innovation horizon? And I think as a leader, you have 3 tasks that you need to try to accomplish. So we need to think about establishing clear strategic purpose that provides guidance and direction for your innovation system and enables the people within it to really prioritize and focus their efforts and their tremendous creative and organizational energies. We need to really enable an effective innovation system that drives experimentation, drives learning, and drives evaluation. It has to be a system that is comfortable with learning from experiments that don't confirm our hypotheses or our theories of the future, as much as we learn from those that do, so that we can generate information and that information is really used. And thirdly, we need to work hard to engage a diverse group of individuals. We want to engage those stakeholders in what we're doing. They need to be internal stakeholders and diverse individuals, but also external stakeholders. We need to tap into the ideas of those in the innovation ecosystem around us, as well as those inside our organization, so that we can really promote broader learning and exploration across the innovation horizon. And so as I close, I want to ask you what your next steps are going to be. If you reflect on your own role and your own capabilities in leading an adaptive organization, and in particular leading an organization in such challenging times, we know we have to explore that innovation horizon. It's a horizon because it's far away in terms of risk and uncertainty, but it's not far away in terms of time. And so we have to really try to be effective. And I would ask you just to reflect on how you're doing with setting that strategic purpose, with creating that innovation system, and with really engaging those diverse stakeholders. And what are the particular concrete actions that you can take in each of those categories to really make a difference? And so with that, let me just say thank you very much.